Instead, it
All right, good evening, YouTube. Happy Monday. So, I am Mrs. Dave the lawyer, full name Jacqueline Leah, and we are finishing up the hearing we started last night. It's a nearly 3-hour congressional hearing about the FTC, anti-fraud acts, and what they're doing to prevent fraud and scams in our country. Let's get started.
it's organic. And so I think we want to make sure that disclosure trickles through the entire information economy. Great step forward. I think we want to look comprehensively at all the different ways that foreign influence can seep in here, because what we're seeing in advertising and in commercial settings, for example, is that sometimes there'll be a step removed.
Are you on your
so they might
treadmill,
hire an influencer who does some kind of information. So it's not a paid ad. Instead, it's organic. And so I think we want to make sure that disclosure trickles through the entire information economy.
Thank you. And I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it very much. And now I believe we're going to go to Congresswoman Kelly. You're recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and
My
ranking
pleasure.
member. This is such an important hearing, and thank you to all the witnesses. I think everyone on this committee shares the same goal. We want to protect American consumers from fraud, scams, and dangerous products. Scammers use artificial intelligence to impersonate loved ones. Criminals use phishing attacks to steal Americans' personal information, and online marketplaces are flooded with counterfeit and unsafe goods. Consumers lose billions of dollars each year to fraud, almost $16 billion in 2025, and those losses continue to grow. And that is why I'm also a co-sponsor of the Strategic Task Force on Scam Prevention Act. This bill would ensure that the federal government has a national strategy to stop scams and protect consumers. This legislation builds on my bill that passed the House last Congress, the Protecting Seniors from Emergency Scams Act, which directs the FTC to create a searchable database of scams and work with the media and government agencies to distribute information to seniors. But as the Congresswoman just said, legislation alone doesn't protect consumers, and at the end of the day, these laws must be enforced. And the agencies tasked with enforcement need to be well-staffed. However, and you've heard this already, since this administration's DOGE-driven layoffs, key agencies tasked with protecting consumers are severely understaffed. Mr. Braille, if Congress directs the FTC to lead this new interagency scam prevention task force, what personnel and expertise will be necessary to make that effort successful rather than simply another report on a shelf?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Certainly, this bill includes requirements that there be consultation with a range of agencies, including the consumer protection agencies, who all have a role in protecting consumers from frauds and scams. We think it's a good mix, and we also appreciate the fact that the bill envisions it, this task force consulting with consumer groups, with industry, as well as other stakeholders in the fight against fraud, because there's no one stakeholder that's going to solve this problem alone. To the point of resources, at the times when the threats to consumers have never been greater, the fact that the CPSC and the FTC have said that they intend to reduce their workforce substantially, I think is counterproductive to the goal of protecting consumers from frauds and scams. We need more cops on the beat, not fewer. And I think that this is and should be a bipartisan issue. People don't want to be scammed. They don't want unsafe products in their houses. And it doesn't matter what political party they belong to. And so I think we should have a bipartisan representation of commissioners at both the CPSC and the FTC as soon as possible.
I couldn't agree more. We've talked about the United States Supreme Court recently gutted nearly a century of precedents that protected independent agencies. And if we're serious about strengthening consumer protection, we need to make sure that agencies have the legal authority, but also have sufficient workforce staffing and leadership. Another question I have, and all of you can answer, I know we talked about transparency in fees, and you talked about the convenience of online, and I certainly take advantage of that when I want to go see a play or a sporting ticket and all of that. My question is, why are the fees so high? Even though there's transparency and you see that the ticket might cost, let's say $150, but the fees are $60 when everything is online, what's the reason for the fees being so high or the excuse? Anybody could take a stab.
Congressman, I assume you're referring to ticket fees.
Right.
Yes.
Why are they so high?
Yeah, so the ticket marketplace is complex. There are many stakeholders whose interests play into the price that you pay. There's the artist who needs to get paid, there's the promoter, there's the venue, there's the ticketing company who all want a cut of that ticket price. And that gets expressed not only in the face value of the ticket, but in all the fees that are paid. We think that the FTC and through this bill, Congress has the opportunity to address this through all-in pricing. Going to a show, seeing a theater performance, it costs what it costs to put on world-class entertainment. And we think that as long as consumers know upfront what it's going to cost to get in the door, whether that's $100 with $50 in fees, or they want to see that just costs $150 to get in to see that show, that's the number that they see. We think that if all-in pricing is mandated, as it is through the FTC's junk fee rule, and Congress has the opportunity to provide statutory basis for that, that consumers will be better off, competition will thrive, and you'll have hopefully a little less frustration when you have to go to buy a ticket to see your favorite artist or sports team.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Now we'll recognize Mr. Goldman for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and thanks to all the panelists for being here today. Mr. Castro, consumer trust depends on clear communication, about online service rules and confidence that those rules are applied fairly and consistently. My bill, the Terms Act, is intended to provide that transparency and accountability. In your testimony, you'd support those goals, but caution that the bill's notice provision should not prevent platforms from acting quickly against bad actors. How can Congress preserve both transparency and the ability to respond to urgent threats?
Thank you for the question. And as you said, I'm very supportive of the bill and just caution that there are cases, for example, where a platform sees a fraudulent actor, where there's a hijacked account, they're going to want to act swiftly. I think the bill currently outlines a number of exceptions for when that written notice period doesn't have to occur, the 7-day notice period. I think expanding that list to include a more comprehensive set of situations where there might need to be a fast response would address that concern, and I think there's a way forward to do that.
Great, thank you so much. Ms. Winslow, debt-related scams and unclear financial products can be a major problem for many families. How can clear disclosure requirements help families make better financial decisions before they are locked into costly services?
Thank you so much, Congressman. Right now, the advertisements, and after this hearing, you may be seeing them on your phone pop up that say, if you have $8,500 in debt, you can settle it for less. And there are no requirements for what exactly the customer has to know in advance. So they don't know, for example, that it could take 4 years or that a settlement may never occur at all. There's a number of creditors that don't work with settlement agencies. They don't know that when they're told to stop paying their bills, their credit score is going to decrease. So if they have all that information up front, they may still make the decision to go with a for-profit debt settlement company, and that's fine. But they need to know what they're getting into before they sign those on the dotted line.
Great, thank you so much. And Mr. Castro, back to you. Many U.S. online marketplaces invest in AI and other technology to increase the safety of digital commerce and protect consumers. Do Chinese online marketplaces make similar investments? And if not, why does this pose a competitive disadvantage to U.S. online marketplaces?
So, of course, every platform is different, but overall what we're seeing is that the efforts made on these foreign online marketplaces, the Chinese online marketplaces, aren't comparable. The U.S. platforms are taking these issues of counterfeit and dangerous goods incredibly seriously. They want to make sure that a product that a seller is trying to list that's fraudulent, that is detected before it's even listed, so it doesn't get out there to the consumer. If a product is listed, that they're paying a lot of attention to make sure that if they're getting signals back from consumers that something's wrong, that they're notifying that, flagging it, and taking it down. They're very aggressive in this. In contrast, on the Chinese platforms, what we're seeing is they do have policies, but the enforcement is inconsistent. And the counterfeiters and other scammers that are selling products on these platforms have found ways around it, and they're able to continue to operate around those rules that are created. And so the level of effort that's being put in there is just a night and day difference. And that's why when we found these products, we could find them consistently across these Chinese platforms. We look on the US platforms, you wouldn't see the same types of products. Not that no fraudulent or counterfeits exist on the American platforms, but not nearly to the same degree.
Super, thank you very much. Again, thanks to all the panelists for being here today. Mr.
So for everybody that's just tuning in, there's a lot going on in this hearing. It's about basically the FTC and this bill that combines a bunch of different things into one bill. So that's what the hearing is about. So the main points that you're going to hear them talk about that we listened to yesterday, they talk about Ticketmaster and ticketing companies like that. And you guys know how, like, when you go to, like, buy, like, a concert ticket, it just seems like half the fee, or sometimes more, is just fees. So this was brought to the attention of Congress, I want to say, like, 6 months ago. Actually, Kid Rock testified at one of the hearings about 6 months ago. So that is in this bill that they're discussing. The other topic you're going to hear them talk about has to do with the App Store, and supposedly developers are unable to create apps and have them published in these app stores unless Apple or Google approves it, something like that. And Congress wants more app developers to be able to publish their apps, but at the same time be cognizant of malware or scams. So the purpose of this hearing is supposed to be to help the American consumer and help them not get sucked into scams. And the other scam that they talk about has to do with, like, those debt relief programs. And nobody's really gotten into, like, huge detail, so I'm kind of just putting the pieces together. But some of the congressmen brought up that you have all this advertising for companies that are trying to help American consumers either consolidate or get rid of their debt. But supposedly the advertising they're using is just either not accurate or doesn't tell the full picture. So what's been going on and the complaints that they hear is they sign up for these debt relief programs and they're not given all the information, and they're told not to pay their debt, and then it results in them getting a lower credit score, or they're not told that when you utilize one of these debt relief programs, it can affect your credit for many years. So they're signing up, they think that they're going to get rid of their debt, but when they get enrolled in the program, it's something totally different, and they weren't told about all the ins and outs to it. So those are, like, the main things that they're talking about in this hearing. Let's continue.
Chairman, thank you so much. I yield back the balance of my
Appreciate
time.
it. Thank you very much. Next, we have Dr. Schreier. She's recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. I was just jotting down some recent text messages that I've gotten from random numbers. One just said, hi. Another one said, hi, Kim, I miss you. How are you doing? Another said, Kim, we'll be replacing roofs in your neighborhood. Can we give you an estimate? Another, Kim, we'll be trimming some of your neighbor's trees. We'd like to help with yours too. Another one, I'm sure these sound familiar. Your good to go pass bill is overdue. You must pay it by the end of the day, or we'll refer this case to the Highway Patrol. The scheduled payment for your subscription to Cyber Something has expired. Please click here to enter your updated credit card information. And then I recently got one. I still don't even know if it was a scam, but it said my doctor's name and said that they had recently gotten a prescription refill request and to please click here to answer some questions or clarify something. And this was actually truly the day after I requested a refill. And so I called the doctor's office just to ask them if this was real or scam, and they said they didn't know because they had just switched to a new electronic health record. So I still don't know, so now I'm just ignoring texts of all sorts. So I try not to fall for these, and I don't think I'm falling for them, but I'm sure a lot of people do, and thank you for being here. Consumers are just getting an onslaught these days. Sometimes it's incessant phone calls, but texts and emails are getting frightening and are very deceptive, and more than half of Americans say that they receive some kind of scam attempt every day. I'm probably one of those, and that number is especially high for seniors. With the help of AI, they've got my name. They may have even had my doctor's number, and they may have even known that I made a prescription refill request the day before. Like, this is really spooky. And so scammers have gotten really good at impersonating government officials to scare victims into clicking on these links or sending personal information or even cash to fraudsters. In Washington state, scammers were recently even impersonating the FTC itself, the very agency that is supposed to be going after them. And they're successful. FBI data shows that Washington state residents lost nearly $460 million in 2025 to this kind of fraud. And it's outrageous. So I'm glad to see several bills to address this fraud in the hearing today, particularly the Strategic Task Force on Scam Prevention Act. This bill would commission a federal task force to implement a national strategy to cut down on fraud and catch scammers. Question for Mr. Castro and Mr. Breo. Can you both touch on this bill a little bit? And like, Mr. Castro, you mentioned the need for the task force to prioritize data collection and sharing. Can you talk a little bit more about these criminals who operate the scams and why it's been so hard for the FTC and law enforcement agencies to identify them and crack down on them?
It's a great question. We might have the same phone number because I have all those same texts or similar texts. The issue is that these are, again, organized criminal operations. Oftentimes they operate using services being sold to them specifically to engage in this type of activity. We have to go after the root cause of this. There's not consequences right now. It's if you want to be a criminal, this is a pretty lucrative area to go into, very high reward, very low risk. And so we have to change that equation. And so, when I talk about more data collection, it's partially so we can do more prosecution, and so we can identify and stop these things. Some of these, as I said, we're getting very similar texts. Some of these mobile operating systems now are flagging these and saying likely scams, but at some point, we know these are scams, and they can be blocked entirely, and we can feed that back into the network, and we can also, start being more proactive and less reactive. And that's where, again, it's going to have to take a partnership between industry and government. We've talked about, the FTC and these other agencies, being the cops on the beat, but it's also industry that I think can play a really important role if we're working together. And so that's why I'm hoping to see, move forward out of this.
And it's been helpful to have Apple ask me to report things as scams or spam, but it's not enough, and I really appreciate these efforts. Mr. Breo, but before I have you comment, because I'm about to run out of time, I just want to say that we need a solid FTC, and the recent actions of the Supreme Court, as many people have discussed today, have been outrageous, and if you don't have cops on the beat, you can't do any of this. But Mr. Breo, would you like to have the last word about these scammers?
Sure, I would just echo what Mr. Castro has said. And also emphasize the need for coordination with our international partners. These scammers often operate overseas, far from the reach of U.S. law enforcement. And so any solution to this needs to address that problem as well.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank
you. Yeah, I agree with her. And from the 2 hours we watched last night, I have to say, I really don't understand what our FTC is doing. Because it seems like fraud and scams, especially scams against our seniors, is like just rising. A couple months ago, I went to one of my local, it's like a nonpartisan, local community club. We meet once a month, have lunch, and they have local politicians speaking, and people from around our county come and speak about stuff that affects our community. But anyways, so they had our sheriff and all of the police chiefs from all of the surrounding counties. And one of the things that they talked about was that these scams that target seniors are just rising through the roof, and they cannot keep up with that. And now I'm like noticing it more. Like when I went to the postal office, I noticed they had like flyers everywhere, like how to like prevent scams and what to look for. And then one of my relatives had something happen to her recently also, where I don't even know how it got started, but she was on the phone with somebody from overseas and they were yelling at her, and she ended up giving her banking information, but thank the Lord she was able to like put a stop to it and like cancel her accounts before any like money was taken. But my point is it seems like it's getting worse. So it just makes me wonder, like, what is our Federal Trade Commission doing at all? Because it doesn't seem like they're doing a great job preventing it. So I don't know. I couldn't tell you what they do. It's not very apparent from this hearing whatsoever.
Thank you. The chair and I recognize Representative Lee for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing is about a simple principle.
Real quick, we have a question. When you say scams, you mean real fraud. So, no, it's different. So, but I don't know, because I don't 100% know how our government is like defining it. When I think about like fraud, and I think about like some of the hearings that we've streamed, I think more of like organized crime, like what Nick Shirley uncovered, like in Minnesota and California. I feel like that is like fraud, like, you know, just billing government services fraudulently on like a mass scale. I feel like that is fraud. But scams, I think, and again, like, don't quote me on this. This is like my interpretation of it. So I don't 100% know how our government is like defining it. But scams is like kind of what they're, well, I don't know. They're defining it very loosely. Basically, when I reference this hearing, it seems like they're defining a scam like you sign up for something, but you get something else, like with the debt repair companies. They have this marketing and advertising. You fill out a form and you think that you're getting XYZ to help you get rid of your debt. But what you find is when you're already enrolled in the program, you spent thousands of dollars, it's actually like hurt your credit score, and they're not doing the things that they advertise. So I think something like that is how they're defining a scam. Yeah, maybe like a bait and switch. It would be great though, and maybe they have these resources, but I've never seen them, if our government like defined all of these things. Because I'll tell you, I was complaining to Mr. Dave the other day. It's like, well, gosh, all these hearings, it feels like we have a major problem with fraud and scams in America. Is like everything a scam? I don't know. And you hear that word so often nowadays. So I'd like to hear from you guys. Put it in the chat. I'll read out some of the best comments. But how do you guys define fraud? How would you guys define a scam? Put your answers in here. I know that you guys probably have some really good answers to this.
Consumers deserve to know who they're buying from, and they deserve confidence that the products arriving on their doorstep are safe. As more commerce moves online, and increasingly through platforms controlled by our foreign adversaries, we must ensure that our consumer protection laws keep pace. I'm pleased that the committee is discussing my draft of Stop the Fraud Act, which gives consumers greater transparency when shopping online marketplaces controlled by foreign adversaries, and helps hold those marketplaces accountable when they repeatedly put consumers at risk. Mr. Castro, I'd like to start by going back to you, specifically about the Stop Fraud Act. It seeks to address harmful practices by Chinese online retailers. Based on ITIF's research on this issues, are there some, would you share for us some of the key harms, some of the principal things that you are concerned, the risks that these Chinese marketplaces pose to American consumers, and why Congress should be concerned?
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you also for your leadership on this legislation. In our research, we found that these Chinese online platforms are, sometimes turning basically a blind eye to the piracy and counterfeits being sold on them. And what's, I think, so concerning as a consumer is that oftentimes these listings that you'll see, they use legitimate images. They use legitimate descriptions. So there's no way as the consumer making the purchase to know that the product is fraudulent until you receive it. And sometimes you receive it, and even then you can't tell that it's a counterfeit because it's a very high quality counterfeit. And there are significant risks involved because these are products that it might involve skincare, it might involve medicine, it might involve toys, or it might just involve hurting the brands and reputations of American companies. And so it's really important that I think we have platforms that consumers can go and purchase from that they trust. I'll just emphasize that I think one of the biggest, most important things here is that we don't have reciprocity in the U.S. We have these Chinese companies, they're selling into the U.S. market, but we don't have U.S. companies selling into the Chinese market. And that's a huge issue that we should address as well. And I appreciate that your bill does that.
And you just touched on something that I think is an important distinction. I think many people associate counterfeit products as an intellectual property problem, and they think about the manufacturer as the person that's the injured party. But when you're seeing things like skincare, medicines, other things, clearly there can be direct physical harm to consumers. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And we also looked, for example, at some of the recalls that CPSC did, and we saw, they'd recall a particular product, and, Amazon and, eBay and these other sites would take them down. And then we would go and we'd look on some of these Chinese sites, and they had the same products, and they hadn't taken them down. And, you, of course, as a consumer, they might not even go to the CPSC site. So all they know is Amazon's not selling this, but look, I can get it over here. And it's a product that's dangerous that our government has said shouldn't be purchased, but it's still available. And that's a huge problem.
And Mr. Hewitt, I would like to refer you to the PAC Act and discuss the PAC Act briefly. From the perspective of companies that serve consumers nationwide, what challenges does the state-by-state approach to claims for recyclable, reusable, and compostable materials create for providing clear, truthful information to consumers? And why is it important for consumers to have confidence in these claims that they will mean the same thing regardless of where they are living or located? Would you tell us about that?
Yes, thank you for the question. With respect to the PACT Act, it is seeking to solve a very simple problem, and that's to eliminate the uncertainty that consumers face when looking at a packaging item and deciding whether or not, or making a determination whether it's recyclable, reusable, or compostable. And having a simplified recycling process with standardized definitions is going to ultimately reduce the amount of packaging that goes into landfills. It's going to save consumers money, and these definitions and the certainty they provide are going to provide businesses with the confidence to make domestic investments into our recycling infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Now recognize Mr. Vesey for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of times Americans talk about the fact that they want less plastic, but I think that we all know that that's easier said than done. Of course, we don't want plastic in our rivers and our oceans, as we go walking along our sidewalks. We want to be able to do everything that we can to lessen that. And most Americans believe that all you have to do is place plastic in a blue bin after you finish using it, and that's going to get recycled. We have the recycling bins here all around the Rayburn Building and other parts of the Capitol. But we know that the recycling rate still remains very low. And that's one of the reasons why I was pleased to vote for the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act and the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act to advance our nation's recycling capabilities. I wanted to ask Mr. Hewitt this question. Families across my district, they would actually like to have just some practical solutions on how they can play their part. They don't want to wonder if they're sorting their recycling correctly, only to find out that it ends up in a landfill anyway. How can advanced recycling help make the recycling system work better for consumers and recover more of the materials they're already trying to recycle? Because a lot of this is just very difficult.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you for support of these important pieces of legislation, bipartisan pieces of legislation. We all want to recycle more. We all want less to go to landfill, and we all want to use and incorporate more recycled content into our products, whether we're consumers or the manufacturing community. But before we can maximize those goals, we need standardized definitions, as the bills do provide. With respects to advanced recycling, it's not a monolithic technology. It's a collection of technologies that will ultimately allow us to collect more packaging like plastics that are hard to recycle or often end up in landfills. Plastics bags, artificial turf, textiles and clothing items as well. These are items that currently are not able to be recycled through the existing mechanical recycling infrastructure. And that's why advanced recycling and non-mechanical recycling are so important. They play that complementary role and provide that complementary technology to allow us to recycle these items that are currently ending up in landfills. And I will just quickly add, Progressive Policy Institute issued a report in May of 2026, just a few short months ago, and they said that the
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know that consumers also want to know that when they put a product labeled as recycling or made with recycled content, that these claims are accurate and meaningful to them. How would establishing clear and standardized national definitions help consumer confusion and support innovation in recycling technologies and ultimately keep more plastic out of landfills?
Yes, thank you for the question. We have nearly 10,000 different recycling jurisdictions across the United States. You can only imagine how many different instructions consumers are faced with, whether they are at home, at work, or visiting their family members. And quite frankly, we've all been faced with that tough decision as to whether or not, does this go in the bin, does this not go in the bin? It isn't a decision that we should have to be faced with on a regular and occurring basis. And that's where these two bills, PAC Act and RMA, step in. They would provide clear, uniform definitions for basic terms like recyclable, compostable, as well as reusable, and provide the certainty that third-party certification comes along with that.
Can I ask you this? I need a brief answer in my closing 30 seconds here, but can this help with clothes in the dumpster? Because a lot of people don't know what to do with their clothes, and there are so many different pieces of plastics in their clothes. It's a big part of greenhouse gases, and we never talk about that. Will something like this help with or could be helpful with clothes going in the dumpster?
Sir, short answer, yes. Non-mechanical recycling provides us a pathway to recycle those textiles and clothing items that are currently being discarded into landfills.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Thank you, Maddie. So I have the definitions for you guys. It's from the U.S. government's accountability office called the GAO. And basically the GAO is Congress's auditing and investigative arm. They do preface, though, on their websites that there's not necessarily a perfectly uniform definition of fraud. And they explicitly say that fraud can be defined differently across the federal government. Now, I have to say that I definitely think that that's true because over the last 3 months, streaming Congress and Senate hearings, seems like there's a very broad definition of what they're calling fraud, which I think is kind of problematic. I think that there needs to be more of a definitive definition because it can be weaponized both ways. But anyways, the GAO's definition of fraud, according to their website, is obtaining something of value through willful misrepresentation. In practical terms, someone intentionally lies, conceals, falsifies, or misrepresents something in order to obtain money, benefits, property, services, or another thing of value. GAO emphasizes that fraud involves intentional deception and that whether conduct legally constitutes fraud is ultimately determined through a judicial or other adjudicative process. Similarly, the DOJ describes fraud very broadly as conduct involving false representation, dishonesty, and deceit. Now, with fraud, we always hear waste, abuse, and scam, so I define that also. Waste, according to the GAO, defines waste as occurring when individuals or organizations spend government resources carelessly, extravagantly, or without purpose. I feel like our government definitely has a problem with wasteful spending. And crucially, waste does not necessarily require fraud or an intent to deceive. Someone can just waste taxpayer money through poor decisions, unnecessary spending, inefficiency, or careless management without committing fraud. Now, see, I feel like this is an area that we need to talk more about. I think that we have a lot of waste going on within our government, and I feel like that's like the low-hanging fruit that we really should tackle in order to, make the most out of our tax money and not have it be wasted. But anyways, moving on, abuse, according to the GAO, abuse is, it occurs when a person behaves improperly or unreasonably or misuses a position or authority. So Zin, over here in the comments, I feel like the things that you were talking about with the Trump family would constitute as abuse. Or my point on Biden's family, the GAO would define that as abuse. Let's see. For personal gain, and describes it as conduct that a prudent person would not consider reasonable. Examples GAO gives include potentially using a government travel card to buy personal items, unusually large cash withdrawals, inappropriate purchases outside of work, or using government cards after leaving federal employment. GAO cautions that these are indicators, not automatic proof of abuse, because circumstances and program rules matter. And a scam is different because it generally is a descriptive consumer protection term rather than a single government-wide legal category like mail fraud or wire fraud. The FTC consistently treats scams as deceptive schemes used to obtain someone's money or personal information. For example, the FTC explicitly defines a tech support scam as a form of fraud involving false claims to induce a consumer to pay money or surrender information. Its scam glossary similarly describes imposter scams, grant scams, phishing gift card scams, and others as deceptive schemes designed to obtain money or information. So fraud, to sum it up, fraud is intentional deception to obtain something of value. Waste, careless, extravagant, inefficient, or purposeless use of government resources. Abuse is improper, unreasonable use of government resources, authority, or position. And a scam is a deceptive scheme intended to trick a victim, generally into surrendering money, property, personal information, or access. So that's really basically the definitions of those. I thought that was important since they're throwing all these words around to give you guys a definition of all of them. Now, I will say one thing to caution everybody. So I feel like we as a society often overuse the word scam. We overuse the word scam. And what I'm talking about is, let's say you purchase something or you had a service done and you just didn't like the results. So now you label it, oh, that's a scam. That person scammed me because you were just dissatisfied with what you got. It wasn't what you expected. And I think it's kind of dangerous when we do that too often because then we become like the boy that cries wolf. Because if everything is a scam, we're calling everybody a scammer, then when a real scam arises, like, nobody takes us seriously. So I would just caution everybody, because I feel like this is a word that gets thrown out way too much today. You know, a true scam has the intent of basically enticing you to do something or buy something, and then like a bait and switch, like you're not actually getting anything, or you're getting something totally different than what you thought. That's just my opinion, though. We'll continue.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. Now I recognize Dr. Joyce, who waived on the subcommittee. You're recognized, sir, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, for allowing me to be part of this important hearing. Consumer deception is an ever-growing threat to Americans from small towns to large cities. People are at heightened risk of encountering counterfeit products online every minute of every day. Many of these products come from China. Online retailers controlled by China have found ways to make their product appear more credible as they enter the U.S. supply chain. As recently as February of this year, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol officers in Pittsburgh seized a massive shipment of counterfeit handbags, jewelry, and scarves from China. The items were manufactured to appear as well-known brands that are sold in the United States. These products are marketed as authentic, and they would have been valued at over $300,000. That is $300,000 coming out of the pockets of Americans, and that is being spent on fake products. These items threaten the American consumer, and they violate the law. The Chinese marketplace is working overtime right now as we're holding this hearing to thieve and steal and conceive to take money out of Americans' pockets. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter this August 2025 report from the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation on the prevalence of counterfeit goods from China online stores into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Today, I have multiple counterfeit goods with me that were manufactured in China and are available online to consumers on websites that are controlled by China. Potentially unsafe children's toys like the beloved Yoda, made with untested products from China, have been sold online, looking a lot like the Yoda that we know and love, but being fooled by Americans to purchase these products. A cold medicine that closely resembles what is sold in U.S. retail pharmacies, the packaging only differs slightly, making it difficult for American consumers to discern whether this is fake or whether it's the real product. As a dermatologist, the presence of counterfeit health products online is deeply alarming to me. If a patient decides to purchase a counterfeit product online and they ultimately receive a Chinese manufactured product, that can not only just be ineffective, but it could be harmful to the patient. These probiotic supplements for pets are counterfeit as well, and are a fake version of a legitimate product that is made in the United Kingdom. After pet owners purchased the fake product and gave these supplements to their dogs, some of the dogs had to be hospitalized. There is no way to tell what is actually in these products, and American consumers unknowingly purchase these each and every day online. These criminals understand exactly how to target the U.S. supply chain online and force their products into the homes of American families. And I think you all recognize that that threat continues to grow. Mr. Castro, criminals targeting the U.S. marketplace with counterfeit products manufactured in China are evolving each and every day, and their deceptive practices are appearing more trustworthy to American families, especially when it comes to medicines and other healthcare products. What specific trends are you noticing?
Thank you for the question, and thank you.
Okay, so let me throw this out there for you guys. Because like I said, you know, we throw out the word scam a lot in this country. So I think it was last year when Trump introduced all the tariffs, especially heavy tariffs on China. All over online, we saw these Chinese factories get on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and share with you that, you know, their factory produces, you know, designer handbags and designer clothing and fragrance and makeup and all the, you know, luxury items that American consumers spend a lot of money on, thinking that these products are, made in Italy, made in Europe, made in US, but these factories disclose that, well, no, 100% or 90% is made in China, and then, we ship it to Italy, they put a zipper on it and say it's made in Italy, but really the majority of it is made in China. One of the things we found out was Dior bags, the majority of the bag is made in China, and it only costs about $57 to make that bag, and that's materials and labor included. Dior sells that bag, and I'm thinking specifically of like their book tote. And it's just a canvas bag with embroidery, but they sell it in store in the US for about $3,900, so close to $4,000. So there are people that go online and they can go direct to a Chinese factory, or I think like websites like DHgate, for example, they sell the Dior dupes for like a couple $100s. But in your opinion, what's really the scam? Is the scam buying from a counterfeit factory and spending $200 instead of $3,900, where the real bag was probably made on that same conveyor belt? Or do you think the real scam is walking to the Dior store and spending $3,900 on something that costs $57 to make? I don't know. Like I said, we throw out the word scam a lot in this country, so I'm just curious what you guys think of that. Who is getting scammed? Which consumer is getting scammed? The consumer that is purchasing it from DHgate for a couple $100s, or the person that's going into the Dior store and spending $3,900? What's the real scam?
For highlighting the severity of the problem, one thing we're seeing is that some of these Chinese companies are trying to move up the value chain. So not only they're starting with producing the counterfeit goods, trading on the American brands, getting trust, but they're then improving and eventually trying to sell their own products that are basically replicating and stealing and building off of the IP of these American companies. And so they're not just hurting them in the short term, they're really trying to hurt these businesses in the long term.
Mr. Castro, in your written testimony, you mentioned the Stop the Fraud Act, which you and I recognize as being very important. Can you explain how a published list of foreign adversary-controlled online retailers would be beneficial to the American consumer?
I think the American consumers need to know what they can trust and what they can't trust, and having that information available to them, that these are certain platforms that the U.S. government has looked at, that national security experts have looked at and deemed harmful, will help them make much more informed decisions about where they do their shopping.
As consumers right now are surfing the web and looking at products, do you feel that there is an effective way for the consumer to know who is marketing these products and whether or not they are safe right now?
I don't think all consumers even know that they're buying from a foreign online marketplace. They see something on TikTok or Instagram and they click and buy.
And as
Okay, but, because I like to play devil's advocate, but it's also your job as a consumer to research where you're buying stuff from. Just because it's on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube and you get a link and you click on it, you still have to do your due diligence. Like, I feel like a lot of people do their due diligence. Like, you try to go and find reviews on the product or look for like a Trustpilot account to make sure that the company is legit. So there is some accountability that we have to take ourselves as consumers, because then if we don't and we expect our government and the FTC to just police everything, we're creating like a very dangerous scenario for us. I don't think that we need the FTC or any other government agency completely policing everything that we're buying and every link we click on online. I mean, if something is a legitimate scam and people are losing money and the FTC gets a bunch of complaints, then yes, I definitely think that they should intervene, check it out, fine. But do they really get to define what is legitimate and what isn't? I mean, they can't even define what a scam is. They have multiple definitions for scams and frauds. It's so broad. And again, it sets up a dangerous situation for the American public, because you can think that you're doing something legitimate or you're marketing something some way, and then if they decide they don't like that, then now you're doing something illegal and you didn't even know about it. But also, like, you should be able to go on websites and buy stuff that you like. And not everything you buy online is going to be great. Not everything you buy on Amazon is great. Same thing with TikTok Shop. But all of these stores, they give you the ability to return stuff. So what's really the big deal? But I personally, I don't want the FTC policing every single website, every consumer good, because historically our government agencies do not do a great job. They don't do a great job in determining what's safe and what's not safe. Think of all of the medications and even food that the FDA approves on a regular basis that gets recalled. We've got hundreds of FDA recalls, and every single item that the FDA recalled was an item that the FDA approved. So just think about that.
This threat of counterfeit products grows and our communities are targeted by these criminals. We in Congress must take the necessary steps to protect the consumers and defend their health and protect their safety. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to wave on to this important committee hearing today, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I couldn't agree more. Now, I'll recognize Mr. Menendez, who's waving on, I believe, to the subcommittee. Recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, appreciate the opportunity to wave on to this committee for today's hearing. Too many families and seniors in New Jersey and across the country are falling victim to increasingly sophisticated scams. Scammers are using AI, voice cloning, deepfakes, and other advanced technologies to make their deceptions more convincing and harder to detect than ever before. These scams are costing Americans billions of dollars, wiping out life savings, and leaving people uncertain about who they can trust. Scammers don't care about agency jurisdiction, state or county borders, or industry boundaries. They work together, act quickly, and exploit every gap in our processes. Meanwhile, no single federal agency has the authority, resources, or tools to confront the full scale of this threat. This siloed approach leaves victims searching for help and forces law enforcement to play catch-up, all while scammers continue to profit. We need a coordinated national effort that brings together federal agencies, state and local law enforcement, and the private sector to expose scams sooner, dismantle criminal networks faster, and protect people before their hard-earned savings are stolen. That is why Congresswoman Hochin and I introduced the Bipartisan Strategic Task Force on Scam Prevention Act. Our bill would unite relevant stakeholders behind a national strategy to prevent scams and hold criminals accountable, as well as strengthen support for victims, improve public awareness, and give local law enforcement stronger tools to crack down on scams quickly and effectively. Mr. Castro, would you agree that scams are no longer isolated incidences, but a rapidly growing threat to families, seniors, and businesses across the country?
Absolutely.
In a few words, what is driving this growth?
It's profit opportunity for the criminals. They see opportunities to use the latest technology and use it to go after unwitting victims.
Thank you. And Mr. Breo? Just briefly, how are these scams impacting American families?
Thank you, Congressman Menendez, and thank you for championing this bill. Beyond the financial cost, which is huge, these scams are taking a toll on American families psychologically, emotionally. We hear from consumers every day who are struggling with this, struggling with family members who are victims of scams that they just don't think they can stop. And unfortunately, in far too many instances, we've actually seen consumers who have been so deep into these scams that they've actually committed self-harm or even suicide when they find out they've been victims of fraud.
Because it's generally a vulnerable population that people are trying to target. That's why we talk about seniors, right? People who are newer to the digital age, who may be more susceptible to these scams. But when I ask this question to different industries, they all say the same thing, is that no one is untouched in this moment. Would you agree with that?
I would.
Thank you. Ms. Winslow, scammers often operate across international lines and through multiple platforms. In a few words, how would stronger coordination among federal agencies, state attorneys general, local law enforcement, and industry help identify and stop scams sooner?
Coordination is essential, particularly when we're talking about an industry like the vehicle finance industry that operates internationally as well as across state lines. So in an easy example, title washing, that's where you can manipulate or clean a title, and so people can't tell who really owns that title. In a lot of states, there's still paper titles, and so it's easy to take a title from one state and move it to another one. So you need coordination there between DMVs, between state AGs, and of course DOT, DOJ, and the FTC. So I represent the auto lenders, but the auto dealers obviously are involved in the manufacturers as well. So a strong federal task force on that is the one thing that could unite all those players.
It's a more efficient use of the resources that do exist, right? Because if each entity is trying to grapple with this on their own, right, you're not having the maximum use of everyone's talents, resources, et cetera, when the volume of scams and sophistication is just rapidly increasing on a daily basis. As scammers become more organized and technologically advanced, the federal government must take a more coordinated approach to combating scams. Every day we fail to act, more American families lose their savings, their peace of mind, and their trust that someone is looking out for them. Mr. Breo, how could the Strategic Task Force on Scam Prevention Act help turn today's fragmented response into a coordinated national effort that stops scammers faster and makes it easier for victims to get help?
Thank you, Congressman. If the bill became law, it would give us, for the first time, a national strategy that cut across all the different silos and brought together all of the agencies and partners who have the data that we need to better protect consumers. And importantly, it would also allow consumers some more peace of mind and hopefully some compensation for the victims who have been scammed far too much.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the chairman again for allowing me to wave on. I appreciate the bipartisan work to advance legislation that's going to protect all of our American families. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now, last but certainly not least, my good friend, Mr. Weber from the state of Texas. You're recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to wave on and saving the best for last. I would like to thank the subcommittee for that very opportunity. H.R. 6832, the Packaging and Claims Knowledge, or PAC Act. I would also like to thank the committee staff who have been working diligently with our office for several months to finalize this language and provisions within the PAC Act as it stands today. Finally, I would like to thank Ameripen and the larger coalition of food manufacturers, packaging associations, and consumer advocacy organizations for their continued support of the PAC Act and its goal to create a consistent and voluntary federal framework for environmental claims on various products. I like to say, suffice it to say, we might be able to actually package a better life for our kids and our grandkids and a safer future for them. Let me come to you, Mr. Hewitt, if I can. One of the primary issues we are seeing with respect to recycling and environmental claims is consumer confusion. The lack of a standardized labeling regimen leaves consumers less informed when making purchasing decisions and confused. As we've all stood over two different bins, we've talked about that and tried to decide what to do with this particular piece of product. As I always like to say, it shouldn't take a lawyer to have to figure out a recycling bin. So if we're able to put those clear definitions for recyclable, compostable, and yes, reusable packaging into federal law, wouldn't that be better than relying solely on non-binding guidance? Would that help consumers in I say my district, but actually across the country? You agree?
Yes, sir. I would agree, and thank you for bringing this important piece of legislation and your support of our MAA. But yes, minimizing consumer confusion is the least we can do. We can accomplish that through your bill with standardized definitions and then ensuring that consumers are protected with third-party certification that the PAC Act provides.
Then actually get a better, like I said in my kind of opening comments, a better environment for our children. You know, I happen to have 3 kids, 8 grandkids, and 2 great-grandchildren. So it's important for me, and absolutely, and I'm going to stay with you, Mr. Hewitt, if I can. Another one of the current problems with environmental claims I think we all recognize is the patchwork of state regulations. and they vary widely depending on where you are. And of course, we're talking about California's lawmakers who enacted SB 343, which, for the life of me, I don't understand, prohibits the use of the chasing arrows symbol. They used to have that in cowboys and, Indians, country westerns back in the day. I guess they all had arrow symbols. That's a joke. Y'all can laugh at that. But at any rate, any recyclability claim unless the product meets specific criteria determined solely by one state, California. I know there's been some legal action on it, okay? Can you go further into how policies like those being presented in California would hurt? And I will say even not just California, because there's still that confusion. Not only consumers in California, but in the long run, a direct impact of the increased burdens having been business over 35 years. Businesses don't need those kinds of uncertain impacts on businesses. Would you agree? How can it change?
Well, I would agree, and I would note, just with respects to California, that just last week, the court issued the preliminary injunction finding that large portions of the definitions and the mandates that they prescribed were unconstitutionally vague. So, we, again, had a patchwork now cast into more uncertainty as we navigate the legal process with respects to that one state law. But it's not one state, it's dozens. And that is part of the problem. Companies must navigate these conflicting definitions. Consumers must navigate these conflicting definitions across, like I said earlier, nearly 10,000 different, recycling jurisdictions. And so having this certainty with standardized definitions, with third-party accounting, as well as third-party verification that goes along with it, is ultimately good for consumers. It's good for businesses.
I think it is too, and I've got 30 seconds left. I think that's good. A standard voluntary packaging, like we're talking about, is a good thing. Do you agree, Ms. Winslow? A standard voluntary?
I can't speak for the association, but me personally, sure.
Is it Bray? Is that how you say that?
Yes, sir.
A good standard policy would be a good thing.
Well, Congressman, I think we support bills like California's that set a high bar in this space.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Mr. Castro?
Yes, I think federal preemption here is important. Thank you.
Mr. Bray, I think you're outvoted. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you, sir. All right, I want to give, I think we're finished with the questioning, but I want to give our ranking member an opportunity to say a couple words. She requested, and I gladly consented, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's been an important discussion today. I think that we are finding people who are being scammed, who are getting misinformation, who are being hurt, families that are actually seeing some of their children and adults as well, who are getting misinformation. And it's really important that this be investigated so that we know what the scams that are out there are and how we can protect people from the kinds of dangers that are there. I'm very worried about some of the people who are not sure about what is true, what has been told to them that are things that are not true, and families, kids, individuals who are being harmed as we move along. And that's just, I think, so incredibly important, and that we have to do better here, that there are people who are in good faith trying to do best for themselves and their families and their kids, and it's not coming forward for them. So I just am hoping that we're going to do better than we have done, and make sure that we make all of these questions that are asked safer, and that we make sure that all of our families are getting the best that they need to know and that can protect themselves and their kids. So we have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
So I think something that we need to point out is, I think possibly one of the reasons that people are falling for scams is we don't even know what's the truth anymore. So many people distrust the legacy media. And I mean, they just do, unfortunately. I don't care like what side of the aisle that you're on. There's a big group of people, probably the majority of people in the US, do not trust the news that is being reported from mainstream media. It's just a fact, that's just true. So when you don't know what or who to trust, this kind of invites scammers in to take advantage of that. The other thing is technology is just very overwhelming to some people, especially, you know, our seniors that did not grow up with technology, and they're really just learning the basics. And they don't really understand, like, what is AI and what isn't AI, or that somebody's voice could be replicated. I had a family member through marriage that was a very intelligent, accomplished physician who unfortunately fell for one of these scams, thinking that his grandson was kidnapped or in jail or something like that, and they had, like, I think a copy of the kid's voice, and it was really believable, and he ended up, you know, forking over, I think it was like $5,000. And like, this is somebody that's very intelligent, like a renowned physician, but that technology was so good, he was truly fooled. And, you know, fortunately, $5,000, he could handle it, but he'll never see that money again. And for a lot of seniors, they're like forking over their entire savings to some of these scammers. Or the other thing that I understand it, but it's just really silly, you have these like romance scams where people think that they're dating somebody they met online, or they're even dating like a celebrity, and they end up, you know, giving over sometimes millions of dollars or like their home, crazy stuff, because they think that they're having like a secret romantic relationship with like a celebrity. That's really sad. That's really sad that, you know, these old ladies and old men are so lonely that they're just forking over their money because they think that they're in this like romantic relationship. But my point to all of this is, Americans at this point, they do not know who to trust 100%. They don't. And again, I just think either our government or our mainstream media really needs to do something to like win back the public's trust. Because until they do that, I think we're going to continue seeing these scams, and this problem is just going to increase. And clearly, our government really doesn't have a handle on it. And they really don't know exactly what to do to prevent it. And while they're in the back offices trying to figure it out, these scammers are coming up with new technology and new ways to scam the public, and they're never going to catch them because they just keep figuring out new ways. I don't know what the solution is. If you guys have some, definitely put it in the chat.
Very good and well said. I just feel like, again, there's a lot of misrepresentation on the internet when you purchase a product. I believe that the consumer has a right to know where it's coming from. So anyway, I thought this was a very productive hearing, and we'll continue to work on this issue. So I appreciate the witnesses for being here. Thanks for all the information you've given us, very valuable information, and we'll move forward with these bills. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. Members have additional, if they have additional written questions, and I know there are some, I'll remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record. I ask the witness to respond to the questions promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on August 5th. And I'll ask unanimous consent that the documents on the staff, the documents on the staff list, and there are quite a few, be submitted for the record. So without objection, we're going to do that, so ordered. And this committee, without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.
So we're going to end there for the night. I don't want to get started with a new hearing right now because some of these hearings are a few hours. But there's lots of hearings that we have not streamed from the last couple weeks of July and from the first week of August that we'll be doing this week. But the advice that I could give everybody in regards to trying to prevent being scammed is just pay attention. I think that is what we really need to truly do as American consumers. We have to do our own due diligence. I think it's very clear right now, especially if you're somebody that's come into my streams the last few months. But for me, these hearings just indicate that we have a problem in this country. And the problem is that too many people rely on government oversight, and we can't just rely on that anymore because the government is overwhelmed with all the things that they need to regulate and police, and they just cannot keep up with all the things that are going on in this country right now. We have a lot of problems, and they just cannot keep up with all of it. And to my point earlier, while they're in the back rooms chit-chatting on what to do, scammers are figuring out new scams, okay? So they're multiple steps ahead. So we, as the American people, as the consumer, we have to protect ourselves, and we should really be protecting our loved ones as well, especially like if you're somebody that has an older family member that's not used to technology. I would sit down with them and have like a game plan with them, like make them aware of what is going on. Like I have a family chat with some of my older relatives, and we'll alert each other and go back and forth and send pictures and videos, and if there's like a scam going on or a news story, we're sharing that with each other and protecting each other as a family. And I would definitely recommend doing that with your family as well. Same thing with your children, like educate them, especially with some of the stuff that's going on now in like kids gaming, like Roblox. Dave brought this up to me a few weeks ago. There's people that are really sick and they infiltrate these games like Roblox, and they try to go after your children, and you have to be aware of this, educate your children, know exactly what your children are doing when they're online. And I know a lot of parents don't do it, but it's not as hard as you think. Like one thing that we do in our house is if the kids are playing like Roblox, for example, like we have adult accounts and we're in there with them, playing with them. So we see who they're interacting with. We know what they're doing. Like certain, like the VR MetaQuest, for example. So I can put the app on my phone and mirror it. So when my kid is playing on the VR headset, I can go into my app and I can see everything that they're seeing, hear every person that they're talking to and what's going on. So I think that's really important today, that as parents, we know what our kids are doing. But again, we also have to educate them. Same thing with, our seniors. We have to educate them on what's going on, what to look out for, and what to do to protect themselves. One thing I would say I see all the time that I would be telling my senior family members about is when you Google something, like let's say you need to call the bank or you need to even call Medicare or the Affordable Care Marketplace. A lot of times when you Google things, that first link that you get isn't necessarily the official link. So be careful what you're clicking on. Make sure if you're trying to call a government agency, the link that you're clicking on is .gov, because there's companies that market and sponsor and do SEO and whatnot, and their link is on the top. And when you click the first one on the top, you're not really calling the government website. You're not really calling Medicare.gov or Social Security. You're calling like a marketing company. So I would educate your seniors and your kids on that. Just because it comes up, you know, #1 on a Google search doesn't mean it's that official website. So just like teach them how to pay attention to what they're doing. So that, I would say, is like the first line of defense. If you guys have any other tips, definitely put it in the chat. But I'll be back here tomorrow. Gosh, we have quite a few good hearings that I want to stream, so this should be a really fun week. But thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'll see you here later this week.
So without objection, we're going to do that, so ordered, and this committee